Hello, my name is Bill Forte. Welcome to Building Department 101. This show is designed to keep you informed about where you live and work. Today's segment, we're going to be discussing illegal apartments and illegal lodging houses and rooming houses. These things I get quite a few questions on, and a big part of my enforcement as an inspector of buildings is to make sure that people are safe. This segment is going to go over a little bit about some of the safety issues with illegal apartments, why they're dangerous, and those types of topics. So we're just going to get started right in here, and we will take a look at different topics. We're going to start off with basement and attic spaces. This is where you'll find illegal apartments mostly. The building code requirements for constructing a dwelling. The Waltham zoning ordinance, which is kind of tricky. There's a lot of complicated issues with the zoning ordinance, and they're not really specific questions that I can just kind of sum up in a few sentences. So we'll talk very shortly about that. Work without permits. This is kind of a big one, whereas work that's done without a permit could be considered not safe. So we want to make sure that people understand that the reason for building permits is specifically for the inspection, the benefit of an inspection. Statute of limitations, what we're talking about there is basically statute of limitations on construction and statute of limitations on use. Some of the other things we'll touch on are illegal rooming and lodging houses. These are, there's quite a few of them here in the city, and I think it's important that we go through the basics on that. Means of egress, which is your way out of the space that you're in, and bedrooms below grade. This is kind of a big one, very important to do an overview on. And smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, of course, without saying, are vitally important. So let's get right into it. Apartments and attics and basements. Normally, illegal apartments are usually created in basement spaces and attics, but for the simple reason that it's empty space, and that people want to find a use for a particular spot in their house, and this usually is the case where these spaces have not been constructed or developed. And most people don't think much about it. What's the harm in having what's the harm in having some living space down in the basement? You're allowed to do that under the building code, and the zoning ordinance does allow for extended living space in a basement, but creating a separate dwelling unit in either the attic or the basement could be dangerous, and it's very important that you get the benefit of an inspection, and that it's permitted properly, and that we've had a chance to look at it to make sure that you're doing it legally. Something about means of egress that you need to know is that they must lead directly to the outside, and you have to be able to enter and exit from a dwelling without going through a private space. So having an apartment that empties into another apartment is not considered legal under the building code. So that's something that when you're permitting to add on a living unit, that you understand that that each unit has to have its own separate entrance and exit, and actually you need two of them, so that there should always be a front door and a back door. If you think about a regular single-family home, you think about, I'm going to go out the front door, I'm going to go out the back door in case of an emergency. Well, the same holds true for every single floor. So every single floor must have two means of egress, or every dwelling unit must have two means of egress from the living space. So whether you're in an attic or a basement, the same rule that applies on the first and second floor of most buildings with apartments, that same rule would apply with with an attic or a basement space as well. So one of the ways you can tell if you're in an illegal apartment is to see how many ways out you have. Does it empty into a dead-end space? That's really not a means of egress. Means of egress has to go directly to the outside, so something to consider. Usually these types of apartments are created without permits, and that's what makes them especially dangerous, is that they haven't had the benefit of a code review and a required inspection or several inspections. And so the fact that they're dangerous in an emergency, here's the thing. If you're at a certain address and you call for medical help, it doesn't even have to be a fire, but if you call for medical help and you say, I'm at a certain date, a certain address at a certain street, that fire department will probably be looking on the first or second floor if it's a two-family. They're really not going to be looking at the attic or the basement unless you're specifying. During an emergency situation, you may not be able to discern or specify where you are. It's very important that the fire department knows how many units are there and where they can identify where your problem is. A lot of times basement apartments and attic apartments are hidden, and this makes them extremely dangerous. So we want to make sure that people understand that, that emergency responders have to be able to find you. And, there could be a question to that as to whether or not you're in the basement or the attic. There could be a question as to where you are. So it's extremely important to, especially during, God forbid, a fire rescue situation. So it's very important that the fire department knows where you are. So that's one of the reasons why these things can be dangerous. In a basement, the minimum ceiling height in the basement or an attic on an existing building is 6'8". That's what you're required to have for minimum habitable height. And those are the minimum heights under the existing building code and under the new building code as well. In order to be a dwelling unit, it must have three elements. It must have a separate cooking, sleeping, and sanitary facilities, along with minimum living sizes. So a bedroom has to be 7 by 10 or 70 square feet. One wall has to be at least 10 feet. There has to be one room at a minimum 120 square feet, so that'd be a 10 by 12. And some of the other codes that coincide with that is that you can't have gas cooking in an area where you sleep. So a studio apartment, if it had a gas stove, could be illegal because it steals oxygen from the room. Each unit has to have its own smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, whether it's an existing building or a new building. One of those things that is vitally important no matter what we talk about on this show. You always want to make sure you have adequate smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. If you're not sure, call your local fire department or your local fire prevention office. They will be more than happy to come out and tell you where they belong and how many you should have. So never a reason to not have them. Means of egress from bedroom windows below grade. This could be a lifesaver right here. If you live in a basement space, if you're sleeping in a basement and you have just one window that's kind of up high and that little hopper window at 24 by 36, this is not an adequate space for fire and rescue to be able to come in and rescue during an event, a fire event. Under the Massachusetts State Building Code, whether it's an existing building or a new building, each sleeping room below grade is required to have a window that is 20 by 24 inches deep, 20 wide, 24 deep, and it has to be 44 inches off the floor, the sill height. And in addition to that, an emergency egress escape well has to be on the outside of that building so that fire rescue can get in to be able to rescue during an event where they weren't able to get through the building otherwise. So each bedroom unit has to have a means of egress directly to the outside and a means of egress out from the basement space itself. We'll talk a little bit more about locks on bedroom doors, but each bedroom space has to have two ways out, okay? Again, smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. If you create a bedroom in your basement and you have a house that's existing, you're required to hardwire smoke and carbon monoxide detector. You're required to have hardwire carbon monoxide and smoke detectors in those spaces wired to the existing living space. So you would have to upgrade all the bedrooms in your dwelling unit. So if you have a single family, you would put interconnected smoke detectors in the second floor and in the basement. They would all be connected so that they all ring at the same time. Carbon monoxide detectors as well. If there's no hardwire system present and you're adding a bedroom, you'd have to add hardwire carbon monoxide detectors as well. So very important to have that second means of egress out of the basement space if you're in a sleeping room below grade. Okay. And sleeping rooms near heating equipment. This is something that if you have a furnace in one room and a bedroom in the next, you're not allowed to have heating equipment, open flame heating equipment, because it steals oxygen from the room that you're sleeping in. It actually extracts oxygen and creates an oxygen deprivation situation. So you want to make sure that if you've created a bedroom down below grade that you get a permit, so we have the benefit, or you have the benefit of being able to make sure that bedroom's installed safely and properly. Okay. The Waltham zoning ordinance, I was just corrected on this morning. If a unit was created before 1952 is when there was a big zone change in the city of Waltham, and residential zones were broken up into different smaller categories. If the units were created prior to that time and the zone changed, that's what's called a pre-existing non-conforming use. You'll be able to keep the number of units that were permitted, but always done with a building permit. If there's no permit record for a particular unit in a building that you own, especially a multifamily, then you may not be entitled to the rights under zoning. There is a multifamily zone, a couple of different zones in the city where you can create multifamily use, but they're limited as to size and the size of the lot, how many units you can have per acre. And some of those are done by special permit as well. So just something to consider when buying a property or when maintaining a property. Work without permits, the benefits of a safety inspection, this is what we do in the building department. We only want for people's safety. We are the Department of Building Safety. So when we come in and we ask to come in to inspect a property, it's not to punish anybody, it's to keep somebody safe. And so the benefit of having a building permit is that you have our expertise and our knowledge as to what is required for the building code so that people in your building are safe. So whether it's a single family home or a multi-residence building, it's always a good idea to have us involved. The 10-year statute of limitations, basically there's such a thing as enforcement, that I am restrained from enforcement on anything that's built 10 years without a building permit, 6 years with a building permit. So if you pull a permit and I find a violation with that permit within 6 years, I can go back and make you correct it, or I can exchange or remove a certain portion of the permit. After 10 years, the construction basically is allowed to stand, and it's basically a stop from enforcement. However, there is no statute of limitations on use. So if you're using a building that was never legal, you may be subject to enforcement. And it's always a good idea to just basically just work with the department and cooperate with us. We're only trying to help you be compliant, and again, not for any kind of punishment. We just want to make sure that people are safe. And the reason why the density, the number of units in a building could be considered unsafe is overloaded electrical systems, parking requirements outside may not be met, and there might be a big problem with parking, which causes public safety problem now and again. So these are the kinds of things that density in a building is very important. Okay, so it's just something you want to consider. Lodging and rooming houses, these are problematic, especially around the colleges. We have several places and people that rent out their rooms to college students, and maybe not so much college, but other places. There are people that live together and for different reasons, and usually it's for for income saving and so forth. And these things are allowed, but there are certain rules that you have to know. So if you own a, if you want to have what's called a rooming house under the zoning ordinance, there's just some criterion that you probably need to be familiar with. First of all, you have to live at the house. You can't just rent it out to separate people and have separate leases in the same apartment. So if you want to rent a room to a person, a college student or anything like that, you're certainly allowed to. But you'll have to apply to the building department with my office to be able to have a rooming house. You have to provide off-street parking for that person, for the number of beds that you have, and basically in a resident, it's allowed in a single residence district. Lodging houses are a little bit different. This is when people get into trouble, because lodging houses basically are basically they're mandated under Mass General Law. Some certain requirements, such as sprinkler systems and alarm systems, have to be in place. This is usually for a house for 4 or more people that are renting separate rooms. Even though they may share the same cooking facilities, they're still renting separate rooms. These things are basically controlled by of course, the zoning ordinance, but also by state law. So in a case where you have a lodging house, you might be allowed to have locks on means of egress bedroom doors, but in a rooming house, you wouldn't be allowed to have a deadbolt or any kind of locking device on a rooming house bedroom door. I know that people like their privacy, and when you get into situations where you're not living with someone that you know very well or somebody that's not family or next of kin, you know, you're going to want to be able to lock up your personal stuff during the day, but the law doesn't allow that at least in a rooming house. You're not allowed to have locks with special keys, tools, or knowledge in in a single-family residence, and that's, again, would be a rooming house. So there's two distinctions there. If you have a lodging house, that's usually by special permit. It's only allowed in some certain commercial zones, and you're subject to state building code requirements for that type of use. So locks on means of egress doors, which a means of egress door in a bedroom is actually the door that goes out into the hallway. Those are not considered legal. So if you need a key to get in, it's probably not legal, and therefore it's dangerous. And again, the reason why is because the fire and rescue has to spend a few extra seconds getting in that door because there's a bolt on there and they can't get in because they don't have a key. Again, this could be precious time that you'll never get back when you're trying to save a life. So it's very important. The passage locks are allowed, privacy locks, which pop with any kind of any kind of pin or something like that. That's really not considered a special tool. But a key is considered a special tool. So it's always something to consider. Again, so you want to make sure that your bedroom's below grade. Smoke and carbon monoxide detectors are all in place as well. Okay. The city of Waltham a couple of years ago decided to resume their multi-residence inspection program. Houses are required to be inspected every 5 years under the building code. That's 780 CMR 110.7 under periodic inspection. Any of you in the city have gotten a multifamily inspection notice. It suggests that you let us in and let us take a look around and give you some guidance on what you need to do to make sure that your house is that the building that you own and maintain is safe for everybody. These, again, are required inspections, and you could be subject to enforcement if you choose to ignore the notice. So it's always advisable to respond to the building department and set up the required inspection. This is for 3 or more dwelling units. So if you have a 1 and 2 family, you're not subject to this inspection, but 3 or more, you are required. And you'll be required to do certain things, such as smoke detector upgrades and emergency lighting in hallways of common areas and so forth, and we check and make sure that there's no code violations in your basement that could cause an unsafe condition, and of course we check for the number of legal units there, and you may be required to remediate any violations that are found. So it's very important, again, for the safety of your tenants and for everyone as a whole. You want to make sure that you respond to our notice. And again, you could be subject to enforcement, but I'm going to go on to the next slide about this. Again, these types of inspections are for the safety of your tenants and the people that live in your building. We take safety very seriously, and the reason for these types of inspections is that not only for you as a property owner, liability, but also too is that the value of human life, there can be no value put on human life. It's very important that you allow us to come in and do our jobs. Again, we're not there to punish you. And if we go into the next line here, there are no penalties for compliance. So if you think you might have an illegal apartment, and that's maybe the reason why you haven't answered us, then you may want to consider just giving us a call. I think that we're very reasonable as to how we can help you come into compliance. That's really all we're looking for, is we're looking for compliance for life safety and for zoning and density. There's really nothing that's more important than that. So anybody that wants to come forward and wants to comply with the law, we will be more than willing to come out and work with you to help you get compliant with zoning and the building code. And that's our job, essentially, is what we do, is we're the public safety officials, and we don't want anything else except for that. So we would hope that you read the notice and that you take it seriously and you come and allow us to come in and do our required inspection. That would really be good. When you're selling or buying real estate, very important to come to the building department, whether you're in any city or town. you always want to check for the legal use of the property. A lot of times we have to step in during a closing because we get notified from the fire department on a smoke inspection that there may be an illegal basement apartment or an illegal attic apartment that's not really listed. It's always a good idea to check with your local building department on the legal use and the number of units when you're talking about a multifamily use. We don't have such a thing as in-law apartments in the city of Waltham. We do have accessory use apartments that you're allowed to have in a single-family home after 5 years of ownership, but we have no legal in-law apartments. So when someone tells me they have an in-law, basically that's an illegal apartment. If we come out and look at it and we determine that it's a separate living facility. You want to make sure that you verify the legal use with your building department. The assessor's database may have record that there's 3 or more units in there, but they don't determine the legal use. Only the building department can give you that kind of information. The assessor's office will go there, they'll look and they'll see 3 doorbells, they'll see 3 kitchens, they'll see 3 bathrooms, and they'll say it's a 3-family, but that still does not determine the legal use. The only way to find that out for sure, again, in any city or town, is to check with your local building inspector to see what's on record, see what was done with permits, because again, there's no statute of limitations on use, and even if an apartment was created 25 or 30 years ago without a permit, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's what's called grandfathered. You don't get grandfathering rights on an illegal use. So you just want to make sure that buyer beware that when you're purchasing a piece of real estate that you know exactly what the legal use is. So you don't get into trouble when it comes to the sale or the purchase and sales or whatever. So that information is always available during regular business hours. You can come in the building department at any time and look at the official business record of the building department, and we will be able to give you guidance on that. So we never want people to get caught by surprise, especially something like that. We understand and value we value your property rights and your property. So we just want to make sure that you have the right information. So basically, you want to make sure that you never maintain an illegal apartment knowingly. These things a little difficult to talk about, but there could be, there could be grave risk to a person living in an illegal basement apartment, and I know that nobody would want to, willfully put somebody in harm's way, but by maintaining an illegal apartment in an attic or a basement could really put someone in danger. And again, it's only our position that we make sure that people understand that we just want for people's safety. We don't want anything else from anyone. So it's always a good idea to make sure that that your tenants and your family are safe, and that you can always come to the building department for the right advice. So if you have any questions, please feel free to stop by our department. We're located at 119 School Street in Waltham, Mass. at the Government Center. We're there anytime you need to come and talk to us. So thank you very much for watching, and have a nice day.